One thing is definitely certain. I think that 10.16 is the patch that has the most individual champion changes in the entire season. Now, that's not to say that all of them are super impactful. Some of them are definitely tiny, and Riot even says that they are specifically aimed at pro play. What that doesn't mean is that you and me are immune to the effects of the changes that they're making. If you pay close attention, you're probably going to notice that a lot of champions have moved around since the last time, and it's for a good reason. Of course, I'm going to get into those later, but before we jump right in, let me lay out the rules of the tier list, so to speak. So I feel like I've failed in giving you guys a solid idea of what each position in the tier lists mean. And so to give you a better grasp, B tier is supposed to be the average tier, meaning that you aren't exactly putting yourself ahead of the competition by playing a champion who's in this tier, but you're definitely not putting yourself at a big disadvantage either. And of course, don't forget that as you go further down in each tier, you're also looking at champions that are becoming more and more difficult in general. This being a tier list, of course, I'm not going to dive in depth on how to play each of the champions that I happen to highlight in each of the roles. To get that sort of content, you're definitely going to want to subscribe and check out the other guides that we have here on YouTube. And to find even more than that, you should definitely go check out our website where we have a massive library of guides that we're always releasing new content on. And don't forget that everything that we have is done by challenger level players, so you're getting the best of the best info. If you guys have any questions about a particular ranking on any of the roles, make sure you comment about it below so that I can answer it the next time we go over champions, whether that be in our best champions video or in the next tier list. But I guess I've kind of been stalling enough, so make sure you like the video and let's jump right into the mid lane. Right away, you're probably noticing that the broken tier is a little bit of a party. We've got 5 champions up there: Annie, Galio, Diana, Fizz, and Swain. In particular, Annie, Galio, and Diana have been doing really well in the past patches, and I don't see them in the next patch getting taken down at all. They aren't really countered by anybody who happens to be moving up or getting buffed, and they aren't getting nerfed either. A small thing to keep in mind is that Nimbus Cloak does technically nerf Galio, and to a certain degree Annie if you happen to be playing the build that takes it, and those two might be a bit of a close call and maybe should move down to S tier. Let me know what you think about them too. As for Fizz and Swain, they recently moved up because their performance has skyrocketed, and in the case of Swain in particular, he's a champion who got massive changes on the last patch, and it resulted in way more performance gains than I ever thought he would get. Originally, I'd estimated he would be in A tier roughly, but he is absolutely smashing it on this patch, and considering that he's getting no nerfs, and he's not really having any big counters come up into lane against him, he should still be smashing on the next patch, and is somebody that you should definitely learn how to play against if nothing else. Taking a bit of a hop over into A tier, I'm going to mention Nocturne here because he did move down from S tier, and that's because the passive nerfs to him in the mid lane hit him harder than you might be expecting. The reason why Nocturne mid is good in the first place is because he can survive and farm and get to the point where he can burst out and dive on top of people who normally would be able to bully him. When these nerfs actually go through, his ability to sustain is going to be nerfed quite a bit, even more so because it doubles as the way that he can clear waves really effectively. I don't think he's going to go all the way down to being a champion who's pretty much just average, but I do think he's going to be taken down a notch. There's quite a few times where you guys were really questioning my Nocturne placement in the past, but what do you think about him now, in the position that he's in on this current patch and as we move into patch 10.16? The second to last champion I'm going to highlight for the mid lane is going to be Kog'Maw because he moved downwards as well. And this is entirely because of an indirect reason. You see, Kog'Maw struggles when people can get on top of him and really destroy him. And his E-Slow is a very effective tool at keeping people off of him. But when he's running up against people who have similar range to him, or the ability to close the distance in a way that really never allows him to win a trade, it becomes a big problem. Champions like Fizz, Zed, or even the nerfed Nocturne can still really cause him problems. And when he isn't really allowed to just exist and sit still and actually garner some items, it becomes really hard for him to do anything. The last champion I'm going to talk about is going to be Akali, and this is because she directly got changes on the patch. Usually I would only talk about people if they moved up or down or if they really stood out, but I feel like a lot of people are going to be baited into Akali because of this, so I want to address it. She got 5 damage on her Q, and the most important change is that her E damage was changed from physical to magical. And a lot of people misinterpreted what this would do on a champion who experienced this before, Shaco. He had experienced a very similar change where the damage type was changed, and this ended up causing really big problems for him in lane and as he scaled, because it was more common for people to have a certain type of resistance against him. At the time, AD Shaco was the thing to be playing, And so because he got his damage changed to physical, it was a huge nerf for his overall E damage, which sometimes was an ability that you maxed. While Akali's changes might actually help her in the very early game if the opponent doesn't itemize magic resist early, it ends up hurting her in the long run. And if the person that she happens to be playing against is something like a Galio, or anybody who happens to take double magic resist in their minor runes, then it actually is just an overall nerf. The only redeeming factor here is that if Akali gets Void Staff, the penetration applies to her E, which is really good. But it's really easy for a scenario to arise where it's weaker in the early game and it's weaker in the mid game. And you have to ask yourself, is that something that Akali really should have happen to her? It'll be interesting to see exactly how it lands, but in my eyes, from the experiences that we've had in the past, it seems like it's a 5 damage buff on her Q, and then a change on her E that actually won't end up helping her. With that, we've wrapped up the mid lane, so let's jump up to the top lane and point out that the broken tier is just a tiny bit different. Right now, top lane in my eyes is the lane that has the least movement on this patch, and apparently the situation is so extreme that it makes my voice crack. Urgot and Shen remain in the broken tier, while Singed moves down to the S tier. There really isn't much of an argument to be made around Shen. He's absolutely smashing it at all elos, and I'm fairly certain that everybody's in agreement that it was unnecessary. And with the recent skin reveal of a skin coming out for Shen, now everybody understands why the buff happened. Now, I'm not saying that that's true, I don't buy into conspiracy theories all that much, but it seems kinda coincidental, doesn't it? Let me know what you think. Is it true? Do you really think that Shen got buffed just because there's a skin coming out? Really though, Urgot is a solid pick into just about anything right now, because there are very few champions who effectively manage to bully him out hard enough to the point where he doesn't get what he wants, which is level 13 and 2 items. Looking at the current jungle, and even to a degree the current mid-meta as well, it's actually pretty hard for Urgot to end up in a situation where he simply can't do anything in his lane. The tools that he has are really effective right now, especially at stopping people from tower diving him, which is the worst thing that could ever happen to him. In the S tier, I'm going to point out Fiora because I just moved her up. And in case you don't understand what her buffs actually did for her and you didn't manage to catch our Broken Things video, let me summarize. Fiora's Q is getting a cooldown decrease. However, normally what happens is that when you hit something with your Q, you already get a cooldown refund. Thanks to the fact that her cooldown is going down in the first place, she actually ends up having more mobility for free than she ever could before, while also having pretty much the exact same amount of mobility if she's hitting something. And it's not something that's super small. It's about 1.5 seconds worth of difference, which is a long time when you consider how quickly you can kill somebody. This also strengthens her laning and her trades, to the point where it pretty much seems unnecessary. Fiora has never been a bad champion, Bramblevest is just really good. The last champion that I'll highlight for C tier is Set, because he is somebody who really got hit hard in a very unfair way. Set seemed to be being a little bit of an issue because he was good in jungle, and he was also good in support, and it was builds that Riot just, I guess, don't like, because they don't really give any justification for nerfing support Set or nerfing Set in the jungle, when he really isn't all that amazing. Now, Riot did do a good job of trying to hit Set top as little as possible, but losing damage on his E in the later stages of the game, and even more damage on his W again, because it was already nerfed before, it seems to be really locking Set into only doing one thing, and that's taking something like Conqueror, rushing Blade of the Ruined King, and only being effective in the top lane. They're nerfing all of the angles that tank Set could go, and that really sucks when it didn't seem to be doing spectacularly. Maybe they just really weren't fans of the fact that Set can go mid just as effectively as he can go most other positions. But this just doesn't seem like something that's really going to get anything done. If you want to pick Set mid and it's really good, you're still going to pick it even if it does 20 less damage, or 40 if you add on the E. Do you guys think that Set's nerf is actually justified? Because I know a lot of people who disagree and think it was really weird and kind of dumb. And my suggestion to replacing it with something else would be maybe a base stat nerf of some kind, like magic resist, so that it's not really free for him to go through the lane against certain champions. And while you're thinking on that one, we've wrapped up the top lane tier list, so now it's time to move over to the jungle and talk about the Bush Boys. Jungle is in a really interesting spot right now because a lot of champions are in a decent spot. If you take a glance at the actual full tier list, you'll notice that the champions in C tier are the laners that Riot gave jungle buffs to randomly, and I will keep them there because Riot seems to think that it's okay for them to be there. Ignoring them, you're only looking at a handful of champions that are actually in C and D tier. Jumping over to highlight the broken tier though, Volibear and Kha'Zix are at the top, and while Volibear might be understandable as he is still performing absolutely spectacularly, Kha'Zix might seem like a bit of a question mark because he is getting nerfed. But let me tell you why that nerf actually doesn't do anything. You see, Kha'Zix's damage getting buffed on his Q isolation doesn't matter if it's 20% or 10%. Now, I can't be 100% sure because I don't play the champion nearly enough, but when your damage gets buffed, you need to think about it specifically in the jungle like this. Does taking 10% off of Kha'Zix's Q on isolation actually save me any spell casts? Does it save me any auto attacks? And if the answer is few to none, then the impact of the nerf itself on the champion's health and speed in the jungle is going to be little to none. And this does bleed over to everything. You need to think about dragons, you need to think about Rift Heralds and all that sort of stuff, which are pretty much permanently isolated. But here's the issue with that. Kha'Zix doesn't actually need to have ridiculously amazing clear on those because he already has it. Late game Kha'Zix's Q is like sub 3-second cooldown when you're hitting an isolated target, which is insane on its own. Chunking things out for 1,000 damage every couple seconds is crazy, and having the ability to do similar things in actual fights against champions is also really nice. But when Kha'Zix is overkilling you by more than 700 damage, maybe even more, who knows, you gotta ask yourself, does taking 10% off actually do anything? Because it's the 10% that he has already on top that's already gotten him to a lead, where it's not just him overkilling you by 100 health, it's not him overkilling you by 200. He's killing you before he even has to use all of his abilities on you. And you remember what we just spoke about earlier? If he still has to use 2 Qs on you, then he still has to use 2 Qs on you. As long as it doesn't make him use 3, that's where a difference can come in. And from my point of view, experience against the champion and also playing the champion somewhat, it doesn't seem like it's actually going to make that much of a difference. But now that I've given my essay on why I think Kha'Zix is going to remain in the Broken tier, where do you think he's going to end up? Do you think my thoughts are justified? Maybe you're a Kha'Zix main and you want to drop your opinion. Feel free to do so. Now there's 2 people I'm going to highlight in A tier. I'm going to highlight Hecarim and Graves, and let's go over Graves first. Graves really is an interesting champion. He's usually super stifling when he's around, and it makes it hard for certain junglers to be able to do anything. This can be helped a bit depending on what the metas in each of the lanes are. And right now, it's definitely one of those situations where he's actually hurt by what he's going up against. The downside of having a shotgun is it's a shotgun, so you can't actually hit things at long range. And when Graves' hopes of actually getting in to deal damage or really just be useful at all are basically nothing, then it's extremely hard to ever justify picking him. Right now, with a game the way it is, it's actually really easy for things to slip into a place where Graves just can't do anything unless he's monumentally ahead. And in that same meta shift, where CC is becoming even more common, it's also a problem for him to be in that as well. He just doesn't have the passive tankiness of other champions unless he's already stacked up a bunch of his E and is only then good against physical damage. While I can't say 100% for sure if he deserves to be an A tier instead of S tier, I do think it's real close, and I'm interested to hear what you guys think. Because, I mean, let's face it, I'm not playing games in Platinum, Gold, Silver, Bronze, or Iron, so I don't know how aggressive Graves feels to you guys in general. I know I hate the champion sometimes, but do you? Frankly, I wouldn't be surprised if he took a little bit of a hit, and I wouldn't mind it either. It would definitely improve the health of the jungle overall. In the case of Hecarim, he's also interesting. He's getting a buff on his E where he gets more movement speed, and the way it ramps up over 3 seconds, it would also provide him even more movement speed during that, and of course the last second being a full doubling of his movement speed. In this case, I actually do think that it will push him up just enough, because it actually does have extra synergy with his kit, and it will make him be able to hit harder. Now, it doesn't help him against people who are good against him already, but I think the change is actually so drastic that it will make it really hard to do something against Hecarim if you don't have CC, mobility, or heavy slowing to be able to actually get him off of you. Next up, Set in the B tier is similar to what we talked about in the top lane, where he's getting nerfs to his W and his E, and that hurts tank Set. And tank Set is what you see in the jungle. You really can't get a damage Set in the jungle, simply because he's never really in 1v1s, and he also needs to not just get chunked out instantly when he's around objectives. He might actually even deserve to be placed lower at this point, who knows? 20 to 60 damage might not seem like a lot, but it can add up over a couple spellcasts, and especially when you consider that sometimes that's all you need to not kill an enemy AD carry or something like that. And in the era of Death Dance, I mean, hey, that can be a big problem. So that's the last highlight for jungle, so let's move on to bot lane now and talk about AD carries, where we see a little bit, a little bit of a shift in terms of the list here, because, Caitlyn goes from the casual B tier all the way up to broken tier. The sniper lady said, nah man, you're putting me in the wrong B section, and just jumped up to the top of the 80 carries off of one small buff. And I mean, that just goes to show how much of a knife's edge bot lane really was on. Caitlyn got a small damage buff and a movement speed buff, and it's made her that much more oppressive in the bot lane, with the state of all the other AD carries and some of the supports being the way that it is. Considering that some of the champions that she counters are getting nerfed, and that some of the champions that she does well against are only getting very small buffs, I don't really see them overturning her oppressive lane state anytime soon. And the support meta only really kind of leans into Caitlyn. You can even argue the same for the jungle, where champions really don't have really long range engage, and that becomes a problem because they're not so much picking people off and pulling them into bad situations as they are just running at them and then beating their head in. Set's a perfect example. It's actually pretty hard for a Set to get on a Caitlyn because he has to move past all of her traps somehow, he has to be able to get in range for his E, which is smaller than her basic attack range, and it becomes really difficult to actually play the game. Because the rise of Caitlyn was so sudden, there are a couple champions who are going to be suffering, namely Kog'Maw, Jinx, and to a certain degree, Draven. Kog'Maw didn't do quite as well as I thought he would on this patch, and that's because Caitlyn just absolutely dominated pretty much any other AD carry. I don't really see him moving any lower than the S tier performance that he showed us on the past patch, but on 10.16, Jinx and Twitch are gonna definitely take a step downward. And even though Draven really was borderline to be moving up, I think he pretty much solidifies himself as a B tier champion right now, considering how hard it can be for him to play into Caitlyn. Let's not pretend like it's just Caitlyn holding everybody else back though. Jhin, Ashe, Yasuo, and Kog'Maw all have tools against either all or some of the other AD carries that are below them in order to really make their lives miserable. And the support meta, to a certain extent, isn't helping out with that either, as safety is definitely one of the things that a lot of supports are offering right now. There's two other AD carries I want to talk about. First is Tristana. Her E-buff is pretty interesting, and I do actually think it's going to take her out of the C tier and up into the B tier, because she does have a pretty good laning phase, but it can be really difficult for her to actually get going after that, because it's very easy to get on top of a Tristana and overwhelm her, so she doesn't really have tools to deal with more than one person. Giving her more of a punch in the fights that she starts and at the beginning of fights where she throws her E, that can actually make a big difference in terms of her timing in fights, as well as her ability to chunk people out quicker. Of course, pushing and also killing towers is benefited as well, so you got that going for you as well. The other AD carry is Lucian, who I do think actually moves up from D into C tier here with the buffs that he got. Giving his ultimate more shots does increase his damage by a decent bit, and it's better damage than him being able to auto-attack, because a lot of the time, Lucian's in danger when he's auto-attacking, and allowing him to have more shots to rip through people over the course of a game is very strong. And it might even see the item meta on Lucian change completely. Being able to gun down people from a range definitely isn't his specialty, but getting a couple more to take out some people who normally would have survived isn't something that should be ignored, especially when the ability actually scales really hard, which is somewhere that Lucian can struggle in the later stages of the game, due to his lack of range. With AD carry wrapped up, let's move on to the supports now, the other half of the bot lane. And if anybody tells you that AD carry is a more significant portion of the bot lane, you slap that person right on the nose and tell them no. In the broken tier, we've got Sona and Maokai, and the surprising one here is actually Sona. She did do better on last patch than I thought she would, and I mean, I had rated her S tier, so I already thought she was going to be doing pretty damn well. And I think that the difference in the performance that I saw was due to a really key factor that I had actually gone over several times in the last patch. And I even kind of covered it in the Broken Tricks video that we just did. Having fast, reliable, on-demand CC is basically at a premium right now. And any champion who doesn't have to rely on slow-moving or delayed skill shots for CC is going to be doing a lot better, because many champions right now have weaknesses to CC. That is the reason why Maokai's support has been and remains one of the best supports. Even as you move into the higher relos, he's still top 5 easily. Obviously though, Sona offers something very different to Maokai, but what she has in her ultimate and the way that her abilities scale and what they actually give her allies is enough. And when I say enough, I mean it's enough for basically any situation. Sona can deal pretty respectable damage, she can reduce enemy damage output, she can cripple enemies with slows without ever having to even touch her ultimate, and she can also provide heals, shields, movement speed, and additional damage to allies. While this all sounds great, there's gotta be a downside, right? And the answer is that it's not as good as other people might be able to give. But have a few items, and by few, I mean really only 2 items on Sona, and all of a sudden, you're turning almost unstoppable. It's pretty crazy how right now she's so effective into so many matchups, and with the state of AD carry, it does make sense. People are actually having a considerably hard time getting on top of her and actually killing her. I mean, really, let me just give you an example. What is a Kaisa going to do to kill a Sona at level 1, 2, and 3? What is a Phelios going to do? Even if he hits his level 2, he still doesn't have good guns to kill her, and he's probably just going to be slowly getting chunked out, and all of a sudden, you have a lane with a Sona where the Sona has an advantage. And there's plenty of other champions that share that problem. Now, where you would look to help for this is with other supports in the meta, but they just don't seem to be able to do enough. The next champions that I'm going to highlight are in the A tier, and here we're moving up Senna and Rakan. Rakan's 25% movement speed buff is actually big, a lot bigger than the one that we saw in Hecarim earlier, and it's because Rakan isn't doing it for damage, and it's also useful in multiple scenarios. Having extra movement speed on Rakan R allows you to catch up to allies to be able to peel them more effectively. It also lets you engage more effectively. It can, to a certain degree, allow you to escape more, and can be the one thing that allows you to catch up to enemies after you're just barely not able to get them out with a normal ability like your W. Let's not forget that the distance that you can make between you and other people that you charm also increases because the movement speed increases. While you might think this doesn't directly influence anything to do with the charm, keep in mind that charmed enemies walk towards you, and so even if you could change up the angle a little bit, that can make a big difference. You might be able to move people out of the way to expose their allies that are trying to hide behind them. That's something that could absolutely happen. In the case of Senna, last patch I had called that people are slowly getting less and less mobility. This is one of the reasons why Senna support is so annoying, because there's less people around who can really jump around and get out of her CC, and even those who already can, many of them have taken a hit to how often they can do it. With her catch potential being a little bit higher now, and her damage also being something that you definitely cannot ignore, and combine all of it into something that has 3000 health and a Frozen Mallet Black Cleaver, and it's really, really hard to deal with. There's quite a few other changes that have been made, so I'm going to rapid fire through some of them and explain them briefly to give you a good idea of what's shifting around overall. Bard moved down because of the nerfs that he received on the patch to his survivability and sustain, while Vel'Koz moved down because he just simply can't compete with the amount of people that are just rushing at his face who he can't stop with his E. Nautilus also took a hit on this patch where his shielding got dropped, and that's a big deal for his overall tankiness, especially in the early game. And Karma also suffers moving down to the C tier, because unfortunately it's basically impossible to nerf the lane Karma without also nerfing support Karma. And getting a Q cooldown nerf really, really sucks. I honestly don't see how this one was necessary, and let me know if you guys feel the exact same way. With that, that's our tier lists for patch 10.16. And to find guides on a lot of the champions that I've been highlighting and other guides to make you improve at League, you should definitely go check out our website, GameLeap.com. Really, it's plain and simple. There is no better place to get content that's from all challenger level players on exactly what they specialize in order to teach you how to be really good at League. And as always, my name is Ace Windstorm, and I will see you all later.